Afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Dr. Kyle Mox. I am the Associate Dean for National Scholarships at Arizona State University, and I'm also the Director of the Office of National Scholarships Advisement. And I am the campus representative as well in that role for the Goldwater Scholarship. So I am the point of contact with this federal agency. Joining me here today are two of our previous Goldwater scholars, Claire Blask. Say hello, Claire.
Hi.
And Chloe Leff. Well, good. And I'll have them introduce themselves to you in just a moment after we cover some basics here, so you can hear a little bit more about what their journey has been and what they're doing now. So today, obviously, we're going to be talking about the Goldwater Scholarship, which is a national scholarship. And if you're not familiar with that term just yet, that is a term that is used to refer to any sort of major external award. So these are awards that all come from outside of ASU. They're sponsored by federal agencies, foreign governments, nonprofit organizations, philanthropic groups, recluses that have donated their life's worth to a scholarship agency. But there's little commonality in the funding sources, but a lot of them have come from federal agencies. They are national in that students from all over the country or increasingly all over the world can even apply to them, which means that with that very large applicant pool, they are very competitive. And because they are very competitive, that makes them very prestigious. Anything that is perceived as difficult to get is often seen as a mark of achievement, right? They're open to undergraduate students, recent graduates, alumni, graduate students, all over the place, really. We are actually working with students at all levels at ASU. We're working with recent graduates, and we're working with students on all of the campuses, including online students. So there's very little distinction in terms of whom we service, even though we are located in Barrett. We do provide services to all of ASU students and alumni. So just know that this is funding from outside of ASU, very large candidate pool, therefore very competitive and therefore very prestigious. In terms of what we do, we are doing things like this, right? We help make sure the information gets out to students that would be interested in it, we think. We try to get the right info to the right students at the right time because there's just an incredible amount of untapped potential at ASU. And we would like to see as many of our students as possible, win one of these life-changing awards. And we do that by also providing individual advising. So both Aaron and Chloe, took part getting feedback from our office and from our committees. We do a lot of writing instruction. I can't think of a fellowship that we work with or a national scholarship that we work with that doesn't involve some kind of essay, right? And so we're here to provide help with essays. If there's an interview component, which Goldwater does not have, but if there is an interview component, we would help you prepare for that. And for awards like Goldwater, which does require nomination, we also manage the campus committee. And so whether or not you get to apply for this, whether or not you're nominated to apply for this is determined by our campus committee. And so we work with the faculty to make sure they understand the program and how to select great candidates, but also, the faculty that are advising you. We're here as a resource to help them understand these awards and to write great letters of recommendation. So the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation, that's a mouthful. But this is actually named in honor of Arizona Senator Barry M. Goldwater, just like 1/3 of everything in Arizona is. But we kind of lose context of that, right? There are two major national scholarships named after Arizonans. There's this one and the Udall Scholarship, which I actually think is pretty remarkable. But this was an actual act of Congress. It was established in 1986 to honor Senator Goldwater's contributions to our country, both as a member of our armed services and also as an elected official. And the concept of it is that it's going to help maintain a steady stream of highly qualified young scientists, mathematicians, and engineers to help us maintain our competitive edge. So they award about 400 to 450 awards per year. So that's about 10,000 since 1989. Just a quick note about benefits. It does provide up to $7,500 per year for educational costs. When I say per year, if you win it as a sophomore, you would get 2 years of funding. If you win it as a junior, you would get 1 year of funding. And we say up to because some students might not actually have any remaining need. Your financial need might be completely met by your financial aid package. Why would somebody apply for this then? Well, because the prestige and recognition that comes along with it. Both Claire and Chloe are coming to you from very highly ranked doctoral programs, and they'll talk more about that in a moment. And that's a big part of the package of aligning yourself for high goals, right? So this award is a big part of that pathway. The Goldwater Scholarship folks also do a lot of work with professional development. So you're part of the Goldwater Scholar community. They have increasingly been doing more events and podcasts and just listservs and all kinds of things to help you become a better student. Let's pause there for a moment before we talk about the application process and hear from our guest today. So Claire, I can see you on my screen right now. So why don't you go first and introduce yourself? Tell us all a little bit about what you did at ASU, what you're doing now, and just kind of how the Goldwater fit into that.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Claire Blasky. I am currently a second year PhD student at Stanford. I graduated from ASU in 2023 with a bachelor's in astrophysics. While I was at ASU, I did a lot of research in lots of different things, trying to figure out like what it is that I really wanted to focus in on. So I was able to do some internal internships through like the NASA Space Grant Program. I worked for a professor and a grad student for a couple of years. I was also able to do a surf at Caltech for one summer, which was really fun. And now at Stanford, I'm in the Earth and Planetary Sciences department, where I guess a little bit about my research. I'm using machine learning models to work on Mars planetary science problems, like whether or not Mars had an ancient ocean. And yeah, like I applied for a lot of fellowships and scholarships while I was at ASU and continue to do so now. So like the Goldwater was really good jumping pad for eventually getting the GRFP, which I'm really lucky to have for grad school. Just getting that opportunity to really work on my writing and then go from getting the Goldwater to working on those like bigger grants was a really good experience.
Great, thank you. Chloe, how about you?
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe Leff. I'm a 2023 Goldwater Scholar and 2024 Arizona State graduate. I majored in both biochemistry and molecular biosciences and biotechnology while I was at ASU. And then now I'm a first year PhD student at Penn. I'm in the cellular and molecular biology graduate group with a concentration in gene therapy and vaccines. So while I was at ASU, I did, like Claire, obviously, and many of you, I'm sure, a lot of different undergraduate research things. I worked in a lab in the Biodesign Institute for, I'd say, probably 3 of my 4 years, almost 3 years of the four, working on some DNA nanotechnology research. And then I've also did the Dodd-Rise program, if any of you guys have heard of that, which is a summer internship in Germany doing research. And then I also did a couple other sort of internship type things at Mayo Clinic and then at a biotech startup. So now, I mean, just started my PhD program, so I don't quite have my research figured out yet, but it'll likely be in some sort of like CAR T or CAR T adjacent field, which is chimeric antigen receptor T cells, if you aren't familiar.
Great, thank you very much. As we've been talking, I've been grabbing any kind of fellowship that they've been shooting out acronyms as we're going through. We'll talk about them a little bit at the end, you know, and I hope that's part of the picture that you get is Goldwater is just one of a suite of a whole wide range of different awards that you can and should apply for, and they build upon each other quite a bit. And so it's not an accident that they're all mentioning multiple awards. So for Goldwater, in terms of eligibility, you need to be a sophomore or a junior by based on your expected graduation. So it doesn't matter how many credits you have. It doesn't matter how long you've been at ASU. What matters is how what your expected graduation date is. So if you have at least a semester of study remaining after this year, meaning after this coming summer, you'll have at least a semester or a full year, you would be considered a junior. If it is more than that, then you would be considered a sophomore. If you have any questions about that, that's a great question to ask me individually later on. And that's one of the things, as you'll find out, we'll do on the check-in is to make sure that you're actually in one of those categories. Most common question I get is, oh, I'm doing a +1, and really it just depends on when you would finish your bachelor's degree or when you'd complete the credits for that. We're seeing a lot more +1 degrees at ASU these days. You have to be pursuing a career in mathematics, science, or engineering. If you are interested in pursuing a career as a practicing physician, this is not the appropriate scholarship. They're looking for people that want to be research scientists. You could be pursuing an MD PhD, right? As it says here, there are very strong preferences that you're pursuing a PhD. I've been advising on Goldwater for 19 years. I've never had a student who had successfully proposed a master's degree. I don't think I've ever had a student who has been nominated who is only proposing a master's degree. So the idea is they're looking for people that want to go into research careers. If you want to do an MD PhD, it would need to be primarily focused on research. The legislation says B average or better. That's a 1986 B, which equates to about a 3.8 in 2024 GPA. They say top quarter of class, and they would still accept applications from somebody with a 3.0 or better. But in all reality, because of the large size of the applicant pool, the competitiveness of our own pool, it's very difficult for us to reach beyond students with a 4.0, 3.9 or so to nominate them. They would have to have really extraordinary research achievements to bypass that, because we have an abundance of students with straight A GPAs and also incredible research CVs. So even though it does say that, in reality, it's a little higher than that. You do need to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. This is a federal program. It is funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars. And like I mentioned, you have to be nominated by ASU. In terms of criteria, what are they looking for? Again, this is a subjective review. They have eminent scientists and all the major fields of study who sit on the national committee in teams of 3. Actually, they work in pairs, teams of 2, and they work to select scholars in their own little disciplinary silos. What they're looking for is, exceptional academic record, but more than just the numbers, more than just the letters, they are looking at your combination of majors. So as we heard from both Claire and Chloe, sometimes a good focus on one major, or sometimes an interesting combination of majors. But they're also looking at the classes that you're taking. Some majors might have a more inviting pathway or a less challenging pathway. Others might have a more challenging curriculum that's intended for people that go into PhDs, or maybe people go above and beyond, what's required. So if you have less than perfect grades, it would matter, are you doing that in your major courses, or did you get a B in human event, right? Or something like that. Clarity of vision, strong motivation. So again, both of our, Goldwater scholars referred to multiple different research activities they've been engaged with, right? You have gotten started on your research career. You're not waiting to get started. And there's a clear idea of where you're heading with that. You're not just grabbing whatever random experience comes by. Maybe you did in year 1 and year 2, but you're starting to put together a plan of where you'd like to end up. And as I mentioned, they would like to see you going into a pure research career. And so if you wanted to work in R&D for Colgate and make better toothpaste, that's not really what they're hoping to see. If you wanted to be a practicing physician, that's not really what they're hoping to see. They want to see you doing pure research. Another bonus point is any kind of anything on your CV that is publishing results of your work, right? So actual publications, presentations at conferences, posters, anything like that. That you're not just somebody who washes the petri dishes, right? You're actually getting involved and getting your voice heard in the discourse. And that looks a little different in different majors, right? Some majors it's easier to publish than others. So to give you a sense of where we are, last year there were about 5,000 people nationally who applied for nomination. That's an estimate based on Goldwater's figures. Eventually, because each school can only nominate a limited number of candidates, just over 1,200 nominees from about 450 institutions and about 437 scholarships awarded. So if you look at those data, or data, depending what part of the country you're from, that's a pretty good selection rate. But then keep in mind, right, we're going from the 5,000 competing for nomination to, the only 4 that get nominated by each school. I usually tell our candidates that the more challenging part of the process is getting nominated. Based on our historical performance, once you get nominated, you have a little better than a 50% chance of winning at that point. But we typically see anywhere between 10 and 20, 12 to 20 applicants per year. And again, that's for a limited number of slots. We're a fairly high performing institution at 25th overall. I think we could do better. I think we have some amazing undergraduate research programs. And so I'm really happy to see such a large number of students here today, because I think we are leaving some money on the table. Give you a sense of where our students have come from the last few years. So this is going back last 5 years. So you can take a look at where the majors are coming from. No real obvious trends, right? We've got a nice spread from biochemistry to chem-e, good run in astrophysics. We got 3 in recent years. Mechanical engineering, global health. We even had a physics and biochem there. And then you can see where they're ending up. You know, Penn, Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, Cornell, ASU, 2 MIT, Harvard, Baylor, Arizona, MIT, UCLA. You know, those are all really good schools, right? So these are students that are now competitive for some of the best programs in the world. And then the other column is indicating other awards. And like I said, we're going to talk about these a little bit, but it's no accident that Goldwater scholars are also either winning major fellowships before they win a Goldwater or after they win a Goldwater. And I'll talk about a few of these towards the end of our presentation as well. So each of you is limited to, or excuse me, each university is limited to 4 nominations, but recently they actually expanded it so that if an applicant is a transfer student or a veteran, if you're either one of those two, we actually can nominate you in addition to our 4 nominees. So it's a bonus. And I think that's great in recognition that transfer students and veterans may not have had as traditional or straightforward a pathway as a student coming right out of high school, right? They may have detoured for a few years. Maybe they don't have as strong as relationships with tenured track faculty as a student who's been here already. And I think it's really wonderful, and it's done a great job at increasing the diversity of the people who are actually getting to participate in this program. Our campus deadline is just before Thanksgiving, so November 25th, or maybe that's just after Thanksgiving this year, but November 25th. I think I tried to set it before Thanksgiving so you can relax. And we will then forward the applications we received to our faculty committee, and they will determine based on their experience and my guidance which of our applicants best meet the criteria for this award. We do not consider anything else besides that, right? So financial needs is not a component. Various factors related to your background, or we're not picking X number of engineering and X number of life sciences. There's no other factors except for how strong is this candidate based on our interpretation of the criteria. So let me pause there before we get into the steps a little bit. Chloe, you know, if you can think back and if you can remember, what motivated you to apply in the first place? I mean, what gave you the notion that this would be something you'd want to do?
At least for me, by the time I was a junior, I kind of had decided that I was gonna do the research track after I graduated. I mean, I like a lot of people who end up doing a research track, entered college kind of thinking that I was gonna be a pre-med, and then decided that once I had done research and gotten research experience that I actually wanted to do the research track. And um I had heard of the Goldwater Scholarship and kind of the prestige and community that comes with it, and how it's able to open a lot of doors for you in terms of where you can get accepted to grad school and other opportunities. So I think that that was kind of the main motivation for applying
Mm-hmm.
to the program.
Yeah. Claire, how about you?
Yeah, so I had a really great advisor who was actually the one who kind of put my name out for all of the different things that I applied for. And yeah, I had also kind of decided by sophomore year, I think, or junior year, that I wanted to do grad school. And so getting fellowships and presentations and just getting your name out there is a really good way to make you stand out in grad school applications. And so that was a big motivation to kind of both like have experience writing those applications. Like the Goldwater application is actually pretty similar to grad school applications for me, at least in my field. And so being able to get that writing experience was really helpful. And then of course, just like having that access to the community and that network was really helpful.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide on Stanford as your school, and how many schools did you apply to?
I applied to 7, so that's kind of I think that's within the typical range of
I think so.
3 to 8 that I hear. I decided on Stanford because they have, well, obviously like a great program, a great reputation. They had a lot of opportunities to work with professors that were just not my like primary research advisor. So that's what I really liked about their community. There's lots of opportunities to do different things. And since I'm interested in a lot of different things, like that was, I think, the best fit.
Yeah, great. Chloe, how about you? How did you end up at Penn, and how many PhD programs did you apply to?
So the reason I ended up at Penn is actually quite tied to the fact that I was a Goldwater scholar. So within the Goldwater Scholar community, there's a Goldwater mentorship program, and my Goldwater mentor is actually I think she's now a fourth year at Penn. And so her talking Penn up kind of put it on my radar, and then the application was free. So I applied, and here I am. I honestly, I mean, Penn is a fantastic institution. It's far from Arizona. I'm an Arizona homegrown kid, so it's very far. So it wasn't necessarily super on my radar, but that's kind of how I ended up here. I think I was a little bit overambitious. I feel like I applied to maybe 12 PhD programs, which I think is too many, honestly. But I mean, I had a lot of options to choose from at the end. Again, also thank you to the Goldwater Scholar because I'm sure that opened a lot of doors for me. But yeah, that's how I ended up at Penn.
Yeah,
How far I'm very happy with that decision.
well, good. It's wonderful to hear. Yeah, so I hope what you're picking up from those narratives is, the Goldwater Scholarship. If you do actually receive it, yeah, it's going to open up a lot of doors because you start to stand out in this very large applicant pool for these top tier programs. But additionally, we hope that the process itself is great preparation for the application process, as well as other merit scholarships that you'll apply for. So in terms of getting started, the first thing you'll do, and in our follow-up email, we'll include links to the application instructions for ASU. They're on our website under the Apply tab. It's pretty easy to find. But the first thing you'll do, visit that website, take a look, and on that website, you'll actually see a link to apply. And so you'll complete what's called a pre-application on the Goldwater website. So you'll see Apply Now right there in the top. You will not see a large arrow. I added that for emphasis. But the Apply Now tab, and once you're in there, it's a basic questionnaire about your major, your study, if you have recommenders lined up, these sorts of things. And that'll ping me and I can take a look at that and see if you're basically eligible. And then if so, I'll ask you to follow up with a resume or CV and transcripts. So if I invite you in for a meeting, if I invite you in for a meeting, it means that, okay, great, looks like you have the potential to be a competitive candidate for the Goldwater. One of the first things you want to do if you're going to go forward in the process is identify 3 to 5 people that you're going to ask to write letters of recommendation. The form itself, you'll notice, only has 3 slots, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. But for the campus part of the process, we allow you to submit 5 letters because those are going to come directly to us. That's helpful because it gives us a broader picture of you. It might be the first time you're getting letters for some of these people and you're not sure how strong they are. We just like to give you a little more flexibility with that. So we started doing that a few years ago. You'll then schedule a meeting with your PI, your faculty mentor, whoever you consider to be the closest mentor, because you're really going to need their input on the research statement. And we'll talk more about the research statement in a moment as well. My PhD is in English. My background's in English. I do literary studies and creative writing, so I can help you with the language here. But if I am critiquing your research methods, you have a serious problem with your research statement. You will submit that online application for campus review. And if you're nominated, we'll work between then and the final deadline to refine the application. So you will know by the end of this fall semester if you're moving forward, if you're going to be one of our nominees. You're going to get feedback from our committee. They always have a lot of good suggestions. You will continue to work with us to make those final revisions, and deadline is always the last Friday in January. So letters of recommendation. This is probably one of the most undervalued parts of the application from a student's point of view. I think a lot of times coming out of high school or just kind of looking at job applications or things like that, we see it as a checkbox. When we get into competitive fellowships and particularly into application for graduate study, it becomes very important. So in thinking about whom you're going to ask, consider the following. One, their status does matter for Goldwater. The audience here are research faculty members. These are tenured track or tenured faculty members or retired faculty members, and they value most the opinion of people like them. And so they're thinking about it as like a peer-to-peer recommendation. And so we would prefer that you get letters from tenured track or tenured faculty members, so assistant, associate, full professor. Research professors and research supervisors and internships can also work. But again, we want to make sure that they have some status there, a professional researcher. They should be coming from a relevant field. So if you are an engineer and then you decide to get a letter from one of your faculty members that taught you calculus, that could work, but it's not nearly as useful as a letter from one of your engineering faculty since you are proposing to do engineering research. And it should be somebody that knows you well. And even if you've known each other a short period of time, maybe you're in their class right now or you just started in the lab, you can nurture that relationship and curate that relationship so that they do understand what you're trying to accomplish. They do understand what research you've done and where you're heading and what your hopes and dreams are. Most faculty members are here to help. That's why they got into this, right? So one kind of footnote before we get some input from our guests. Quite often if you're in a lab or a research group right now, you probably do get most of your supervision from a PhD student or a postdoc, right? If that's the case, what we would typically do then is work to have a letter written, signed by the PI for the research group, but perhaps written by the lower ranking research supervisor, right? Again, the audience would expect it, the level of respect that they get from the letter to be a fairly high ranking person, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you have to quit just because you don't think your PI would be able to write you a two-page letter, right? There's ways that we can collaborate on that. Chloe, thinking about your own experience, how did you strategize about whom to approach for letters of recommendation at this point in your college career?
Yeah, so by that point, when I was applying for Goldwater, I had already done the Rise internship, and then I was still working in my lab at biodesign. So those two were kind of like automatics, right? So one was my PI from the lab in Germany, which ended up being kind of this like low ranking supervisor, like signed off on by the higher ranking supervisor. So, I mean, I obviously wasn't there as they were writing it, but my hunch is that the PhD student that I was working with during the course of that internship wrote it, and then the PI of the lab signed off on it as well. And then for my PI at ASU, he wrote the letter. I asked him and he wrote the letter because we had enough of a like relationship that was fine. I think I ended up submitting or getting 4 letters of recommendation at various points along the process. And so outside of those 2 that came from people I had worked with directly, I had a couple from professors that I either did really well in their class or that like saw me work in research in a research capacity in some way. One of them, I took an experimental immunology class that was kind of like both lab and lecture based. And so in that way, that professor got to see me actually work in a research capacity a bit as well. So I think it ultimately ended up being those 3, the 2 PIs, and then that professor that submitted the letters for the actual scholarship competition.
Yeah, great. Claire, how about you?
Mine was pretty similar, actually. I think I had 3. I can't exactly remember if I had 4, but my approach was about the same. So I had a PI who I'd been working with since freshman year on research projects. But he actually started as a professor the same fall that I started as a student. And so he was still pretty new, even though he knew me really well. So he was one of my letter recommendation writers. But then I did a second research project with a grad student whose PI was pretty influential in my field. And so I assume like the same thing happens, like the student wrote the letter of recommendation and the PI signed off on it. And then the third one was from somebody who was very senior in my department and came to our lab group meetings. So she was kind of like attached to our group, but didn't supervise me directly. We only interacted like once a week. But since she was so influential in the field, I think she provided a possibly slightly generic, but still very strong letter. And so I think the nice balance of like to a little bit more, I guess like sterile, not as personal letters from people who were very high ranking compared to somebody who was newer but knew me really well and could really speak to my character and work work ethic was a good balance.
Mhm. Yeah, and that is one thing we take into consideration is kind of balance, right? If you, let's say you did really well in one research project or program, and you wanted to get 3 letters from that same program, we would probably advise you against that because those 3 letters are probably going to say fairly similar things, right? And as opposed to thinking about how many different perspectives can we get on you within those 3 letters. In terms of how to approach people, and we can talk more about this in our individual meetings, but I always recommend that you begin with, do you feel you could write me a strong letter of reference for the Goldwater Scholarship, right? We want to give them an opportunity to say no. And I know that might seem counterintuitive, right? But we don't want them to grudgingly agree to write you a letter. We want them to be enthusiastic about writing them a letter. Part of that enthusiasm comes from asking them well in advance, right? Faculty are less enthusiastic about it when you ask them 2 weeks before the deadline or a week before the deadline. Will they write it 6 weeks before the deadline? Absolutely not. It's never happened, right? They're going to write it 3 days before it's due, if that. But they're in a much different mindset because you asked them 6 weeks ago and now they feel obligated to you. And I think the other good thing to add when you're asking people for letters of recommendation is, I wanted to ask you because I think you can talk a lot about blank, right? Oftentimes when faculty don't know what else to say about you, they'll just kind of look at your resume and start regurgitating that. When in fact, if we give them an assignment to say, well, I'd really like you to talk about my performance in this particular project, or I think you can really talk about how I work within a group. I was one of the recitation leaders and I was a grader for this class, and talk about my leadership in the field. That's great. Then they understand the assignment and they're able to focus and tell more of a narrative. We actually have a handout called our memorandum of guidance that you can give them that talks a lot about how to write a letter for this particular audience. A lot of the letters that we receive are return customers, so we see a lot of the same faculty members writing these letters, and that's no accident, right? That's no surprise because they're probably good mentors. But for faculty that maybe have never written a letter like this before, that memorandum can be very useful helping them understand this audience. And as I pointed out, you can request up to 5 for our campus deadline. All right. In terms of the application itself, there's nothing too mysterious. There's nothing too unexpected, right? Very short essays about what your future plans are, kind of a moment that was clarifying for you in your decision to become a scientist. There's a question that asks you to talk about any factors that you think influence your trajectory in terms of diversity, because this is a federal program. They're all pretty straightforward, and I'm very happy to help you with those. Where I am less helpful, however, is the research essay. So this is the main component of the application. It's a 3-page essay that summarizes previous or future research. And I think in reality, probably we'll do both. You want to be sure you talk about your background, make sure they understand what your relevant research experience is, kind of just thinking about, I'm using the list right from the Goldwater: background, experience, skills, temperament, and interest to pursue long-term current research. But at the end of the day, what they're really looking for is, can you think like a scientist? They're not expecting you to roll out a cure for cancer in a 3-page research statement, right? But they want to see, can you identify a problem in your discipline? Can you frame a research question? Do you understand what methods are available? Do you understand how to deploy those methods in an effective way? Do you know how to predict possible outcomes? And do you know how to disseminate the results of that outcome? So when you write these essays, what you really want to think about too, and what you want to emphasize, is what you did or what you will do, as opposed to our group did this, we did that, right? Because they want to give the award to you. Even if you feel like your part was minor, they want to know, what contribution did you make? So thinking back, if Claire and Chloe, if you haven't blotted it out from your memory, what do you remember about how you began this essay, how you approached it, or what general strategies you took for this?
Yeah, I can go first. So the first thing that I did was read previous Arizona State Goldwater recipients' essays, like so many of them. And I just kind of took the structure of one of my friends's and copied it into mine so that I had the same structure kind of. So I organized it the same way essentially. And my essay was definitely on a project that my advisor and I were still very early in conceiving. And so it was really hard to use the I am doing this, I did this, when I knew very well that my advisor would be helping me a lot in a lot of it. But you really have to take ownership of it. And writing a lot of drafts is really helpful. I think I had like 5 final drafts, and I would send it to my advisor and be like, it's done. And then I'd get it back with more edits, and that happened a lot. And yeah, it's more about the focus on like the bigger impact of your work. So you have to remember that you're writing to people in your field, but they don't know exactly what you do. And so writing to a slightly broader audience than essentially you and your advisor to really like convey the general importance is really critical.
Mhm. Yeah, really good advice. I didn't mention. Your readers are generally in your field, but that could be as broad as physics. That could be as broad as biology, right? Chloe, how about you?
Yeah, so I also remember looking at least a couple of sample essays to kind of get a sense for what the format looked like and the general sort of strategies. I was kind of in the unique position in that I was in the honors college and I ended up doing my Barrett thesis a year early. So I was in the process of doing my like kind of closing stages of my thesis research at the time that I was writing this research essay. And so I essentially used the work that I was doing for the thesis as the basis of my research essay, which I think was very, very helpful in terms of helping me take ownership of a lot of it and kind of, you know, what I was doing was essentially describing the process that I went through to develop the idea for my own personal honors thesis on a 3-page set of paper, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not. I found that cutting it down to 3 pages was one of the hardest things that I
Hmm.
had to do. Because that's 3 pages, including any figures that you put in, including any references that you put in, which I highly recommend that you do both, because I think that that shows that you're able to, one, effectively utilize literature to illustrate your points, which is a huge thing in research. And also, if you're making your own figures, that's another really good element to have as well because it shows that you can communicate your ideas visually as well as through words. But I think kind of um, having it be research that I was already doing was very helpful in giving me sort of a solid foundation to start with and then kind of building from there.
Hmm. Yeah. Excellent advice. So, yeah, we do have a storehouse of examples that you are able to access once you get into the process. Very helpful, and I think, as you heard from both of them, just kind of figure out, okay, what's the tone of these? What's the structure of these? What do these look like? How do they compare to the other things I've written in the past? And so, really, really useful. I won't go too deep into this. We'll get into this once we get into one-on-ones, but I really the structure of this is pretty simple. This is sort of a universal grant proposal or research proposal structure, but it's really problems based, really thinking what is the issue or problem to be solved? What have people tried in the past? What's the complication? Why hasn't that worked? What is it we need to know in order to move forward? And then really thinking about what is our methodology? What step by step would we do to try to leverage this solution? And I think where a lot of younger researchers, tail off is not really predicting results or thinking about the answers. Like, so if we get result A, we can conclude this. If we get result B, we can conclude that. And always thinking about what the larger relevance is to your field. So what if we do this, and so what if it works, right? Just to clarify on, we'll get into Q&A in a second, but I just wanted to reiterate a few of the awards maybe you heard us mentioning as they're flying by. But if you're here and you're listening to information about Goldwater, you really should be considering some of these other programs as well. If you're familiar at all with the NSF Research Experiences for Undergraduates program, there are many REUs available at ASU in the summer, but there's also many REUs available at universities all throughout the country. And so this is sort of like a domestic travel opportunity. And essentially, you just find projects that are related to your interests, and you could work in a lab for the summer. Really great opportunity to meet other young scientists and also get opportunities to present your work. Chloe had mentioned, and as you saw, we have become something of a monster with the German academic exchange program. So DAAD is Deutsche Akademische something something. But this is a summer research program in Germany. Essentially, it's much like an REU, and you get to you basically placed with a PhD student in Germany and get to spend the summer living in Germany and conducting research. We started pushing this a few years ago because we honestly started feeling bad for all of our STEM majors who don't get to go on these marvelous study abroad programs because they're busy doing research or they can't squeeze it into the academic year. Last year we had 30, I want to say 34 winners of this. That's just slightly more than 10% of the entire pool. So I would say we found our stride with .rise. So pay attention for that a little later in the term if that's something that would be interested to you. There's a similar program in Canada called the Fulbright Mid-Tax Global Link, where basically you get placed in projects in Canadian universities. I believe that just opened now. And then the Boren Scholarship is a summer program you can do, which has critical language study as its emphasis. So if you're in a field where, yeah, actually picking up a foreign language would be helpful. Let's say I want to work in a space agency. That's certainly an option. In terms of awards that Goldwater sets you up for, one that you've heard mentioned is NSF GRFP, so the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It's really like a grown-up Goldwater. In it, you do write a lengthy research proposal. You are applying for general funding to conduct research as a PhD student. This is one that we hope all of our Goldwater scholars apply for. This is one we hope everyone who even thought about Goldwater applies for, and that would be due in the end of October when you are applying for graduate study. Hertz Foundation Fellowship, very much like the NSF, except private and tiny. Churchill Scholarship, you could go study for 1 year at Cambridge. If you're interested in MD, PhD, I'd really look at the NIH OxCam if you're interested in NIH kind of fields of study, so more biomedical stuff. And Goldwater scholars are often great candidates for the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarship. So Katie Pascovis, for instance, did a lot of work with water technology, what's called WASH, Water and Sanitation Engineering Hygiene. And so she also won a Udall scholarship for environmental careers and then a Marshall scholarship to go do 2 degrees in UK. And she is at Oxford right now. So again, check out our website. That's where you can find information about the deadlines, download instructions. Again, we'll email all of this to you in our follow-up email. But I did want to save some time to see if everyone had questions for me, or more importantly, since I'm always available, for Chloe or Claire, who are not always available. Oh, I was covering up the chat. So would students pursuing an MD be discouraged? Yes. If you're only pursuing an MD, I would not apply for Goldwater. MD, PhD. Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, much the same. Unless you plan on doing research, DVM would not be an appropriate career plan. David asks, I'm mostly an online student. How does one go about letter recommendation? Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe that's more of a one-on-one about strategies for online students to get letters of recommendation. But to be competitive for Goldwater, you're going to need to have been involved in some kind of research activity. And so if you have been involved in some kind of research activity, chances are you could get a letter from that. In terms of GPA, there's a question about if you're close to that. Yeah, it can. You could be competitive. You're certainly eligible, right? But we'd have to look at what other factors are leveraging and where are the less than stellar grades coming. Genetic counseling. Yeah, we've had applicants who have had experience like in TGen and things like that, but really they're looking for people that want to do research, right? So if your research was in the area of genetic counseling, that's a little different than being a practitioner. Right, character letters, no, character letters are not appropriate for Goldwater. They really want to know, can this person do science? It's also a bonus if you're a nice person, but it's not mandatory. Secondary teachers, no, would not be appropriate for Goldwater. Presentations through Google Slides, yeah, it depends on the audience and the situation. If it's something you can list on a resume, absolutely. And yeah, Chloe's preaching for the .rise. Research in computer science, I had this window covered up, so I didn't realize so many questions were coming in. Software engineer, if the software engineering is related to novel research, then yes. If you are developing better future editions of Adobe Acrobat, then no. Sophomores hold off into junior year. That's a great question. Let's pause there. Good questions, Ann. I think both Chloe and Claire, you both applied as juniors, correct? You didn't try as sophomores? Yeah. Had you thought about it as sophomores or hadn't really crossed your table yet?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it yet.
Mhm. So I'll answer the question thusly. There is no distinct disadvantage to applying as sophomore. There's no distinct advantage to applying as a sophomore, but just know that you are read on equal footing with a junior, which means that you are in a pool with people who are 1 year your senior, have 1 year more experience than you do. One of our 4 nominees this past year was a sophomore, and actually he was one our committee thought was one of our strongest candidates. He had substantial amount of research and contribution. Um, so yeah, it's not necessarily going to prevent you anything. I would say, if you're competitive and it seems like this, you have everything ready to go, you might as well do it, because then if you don't get it, then you can apply again as a junior and the labor will be much less because you're starting at a much different point rather than starting from scratch. Yeah, Darcy asked, if we haven't yet started a research experience, should we hold off? I would recommend that, right? That every student we've ever nominated is presently or has been involved in a research experience of some kind. Yeah, and someone asked if you can apply. They asked me directly if you can apply 2 years in a row. Yeah, absolutely. If you apply as a sophomore and are not nominated, or are nominated and don't get it, you can apply twice. If you change your major, that's a good question. No, I mean, as long as you're still within a Goldwater supported field, that's perfectly fine. Toxicology, yeah, I'm not really sure about that one. Again, if you're producing research in that field, I think that would fall within Goldwater territory. Yeah, Shri recommends NSFRU. Thanks for the plug. I agree. Yeah, Christian's question about research, I think that's a good individual question of what that would be appropriate or not. And biophysics PhD, absolutely appropriate. So good, we get those caught up. Any other questions that we'd like to ask, particularly Claire and Chloe? Yeah, both great questions. I think those two questions, is the expectation for earning the scholarship that you go into research in academia, or is industry research acceptable as well? And what if you're not sure about going into research in the future? So I don't know, Claire, Chloe, based on your experience and interactions, what's your take on those questions?
Yeah, well, so I am definitely doing a PhD, so that's 5 years of research. But after that, I have been considering going into industry. When I was an undergrad, I wasn't really aware of the opportunities in industry just because of the small program that I was in. But since coming to grad school, like I have really started considering going into like an industry position, whether that's directly research or whether it's more for me, like something like data science. So I would like to implement, my geology and data science into some kind of like renewable energy work or something. And so I will be doing my PhD for sure, but I definitely don't plan on being a professor once I am done. And so, I mean, they let me get it, but hopefully they let me keep it now that they know this about me. But yeah, so I would say like if you want to do your PhD, then yes, like definitely apply for this, and you're not tied to becoming a professor once you're done.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Claire said. I also am leaning towards going into industry after I finish up with my PhD. So I'd say I think that kind of what they're looking for is I do think that you would be in a much more favorable position if some sort of graduate school, preferably a research-based graduate school program, which is generally going to be a PhD, is in your future. But beyond that, I don't think it really matters what you end up doing with that. And I mean, you honestly you don't have to go into a PhD. I think it makes it a lot easier to kind of write the answers to the questions in a way that makes it seem that you're really excited about research, because that is something that's super important and something that they're looking for. So to Joshua's question that if you're not sure about going into research in the future, if you write like you're sure about going into research in the future, I think that would help you be a competitive applicant. But you definitely need to have some sort of a passion for research. That it's literally one of the questions in the application is why are you interested in a scientific career and why are you interested in research? So
Mhm. Yeah, here's the thing. They're not going to ask for the money back, right? There are programs out there where they do come find you if you don't do, but that's not one of the terms of this scholarship. They ideally are picking people who follow that pathway, but I was actually just in a meeting with the Goldwater president a couple of weeks ago, and he and some of the readers were on the Zoom and did say that there is no distinct preference for people that want to go into academia versus industry. What matters more is like the motivation. If you want to go in industry because you want to be a tech bro and make a lot of money and invent the next Twitter, they're not going to be terribly interested in that. What they would like to know is, are you going to develop new technologies that benefit humanity? The jury's still out on X, formerly known as Twitter, but so that's really the more the objective. You don't have to want to be a professor, right? So that's a really good question. But again, they really want to see that strong motivation for a research career. In terms of types of research, good question. No, not necessarily. As long as, there is a list of acceptable fields on the Goldwater scholarship website. Behavioral psychology, if you're using it in the term that I think in the way that you think are, would not be one of those fields, right? That be considered more in the social or health sciences realm, as opposed to neuropsych or something like that, or clinical psychology research. And nominations are only good for the current year, correct? Yeah. So apply in the year that you want it, right? And so if you're a sophomore and you're trying to decide, my simple advice would be go for it, right? Because you're going to learn so much more about the process of applying for this and many other fellowships, and you're going to develop skill at it, and you'll be much better the next time around. I've even heard committee members use the term, yeah, let's bleed that one. It seems kind of a gruesome term, but they mean like, yeah, we want that student to apply. We know they're not going to get it, but they'll be so much stronger the next year if they go through the process this time. Many of your faculty members, all of your faculty members, I assure you, have applied multiple times for all of the grants and awards that they have received. Nobody gets an NSF grant the first time they apply. Nobody gets a Guggenheim or a Nobel Prize. Just, well, you don't apply for a Nobel Prize, but nobody gets the big awards the first time around, right? And Megan asks, I think a good question that we certainly don't have time to answer here is, how do you go about finding a PhD, right? My simple answer to you is focus on finding good faculty mentors, right? And then, and I would assume, and Chloe and Claire would respond, yeah, they both chose a large number of doctoral programs to apply to, but my assumption is that they did so because there were people doing research that was interesting to them at each of those places, not because of the name of the place, right? So that's really the best approach there. Well, good. We are just about at the end of our scheduled time. Great. Yeah, and Chloe's sharing her contact information. I'm sure that be happy to answer. And I can share their contact information in our follow-up email as well. So any final questions, or Claire or Chloe, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we hop off today?
I think just like good luck to all of you guys that are applying. It's kind of a grueling and stressful process, but you're going to come out on the other side better for it. And I wish you all the best in your research as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, don't be afraid to have multiple drafts and overhaul your applications lots. That will just make you stronger and make you a stronger applicant for this and for lots of other scholarships that you all are extremely qualified for.
Yeah, great. Wonderful, guys. Well, thank you, Claire and Chloe, for making the time. This is the most precious resource they have because they're in PhD programs right now, so they're busier than all of us, I can tell you. And but yeah, best of luck on the rest of your school year, and thanks for making the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Bye.
great rest of your week.